morning, good afternoon actually. Before beginning to delve into the Iranian outreach in Africa, just a thought that came into my mind hearing all the panelists here about, in my opinion, one success in combating terrorism in Africa. And it's in a northern African state, actually Tunisia, and we are about to have elections, presidential elections in Tunisia. I think in the September 15th, in a few days. And I think Tunisia is a good example how to fight terrorism, and how the state that actually initiated the Arab Spring is the state that actually succeeded in the Arab Spring. And given the fact that Tunisia share in exporting terrorists or jihadists, I think Tunisia is the biggest state of exporting terrorists to fight in Syria, in Iraq, in ISIS, and there are a lot of these terrorists are now coming back, returning to Tunisia, and nevertheless, Tunisia succeeded in tackling this terrorism, these ongoing terrorist attacks in Tunisia, and this is what came to my mind, that actually Tunisia is getting a lot of Western help in combating terrorism. They built the land barrier in the border of Libya. They have all electronics equipment from Germany, from the United States, from the UK, and they managed to contain the terrorist attacks in Tunisia, and to somehow curb all the returnees, all the terrorists that came back from the arenas in Iraq, in Syria, back to Tunisia. And I think Tunisia is a good example of success, of education system. There are problems in the south, but also, nevertheless, Tunisia is, in my opinion, a very good example of how to combat successfully terrorism and contain it. Regarding Iran outreach in Africa, I heard about the, let's go to the, okay. Iran is trying for a long time to establish some kind of a foothold in Africa. And I think the only success, and my colleague here, Chaim, discussed about Sudan. Sudan once was considered as the second Islamic Republic. Sudan was some kind of a venue from terrorists from all through Africa who came to Sudan and get trained, financed by the Iranian Ministry of Interior, by the Iranian IRGC. They all came to Sudan to train, and from Sudan, Iran tried to proliferate those terrorists to other places. To Egypt, it was the Egyptian Jihad that trained in Sudan, and other organizations that came to Sudan to train and go. But nevertheless, Iran, this project, this crown jewel of the Iranian export of the terrorism, failed. And it failed dramatically. And today, Iran doesn't have any real foothold in any African state, though it tried through economic cooperation, try to establish such presence in the African continent. Of course, one of the most important pillars of the Iranian outreach for Africa is to export the revolution, and we can see, and I'll touch upon it later on, how Iran is trying to propagate in Africa in different languages through many channels. Yemen was also mentioned here before, but I think today, given the Iranian experience in Yemen, giving their all assistance to the Houthi Shiite, and remember Shiites, or Shia, I'll talk about it in a few minutes. Yemen is a strategic logistic springboard to operations in Africa. You can see Yemen on the mouth of the Red Sea, a channel through which Iranian in the past, and maybe still trying to move ammunitions, weapons onwards through the Red Sea, once to Sudan, now try to Egypt and to Gaza. Very important, Iran is being consider itself as a global player, sending its own fleet to the Bay of Aden, to places near Yemen, near the eastern African coast. Iran is part of what's called a combat group to combat pirates in the area, and it exploits all these ships, battle groups, to do bad things in the region. Another thing is Hezbollah. There are a lot of, in my next slides, I will try to, just a few points, a few examples of how Iran is trying to act in Africa, how Iran is operating in Africa. I will touch upon some states to show typical issues, how Iran is trying to outreach these audiences and advance its goals in Africa. One of the key elements of Hezbollah, one of the key elements of Iranian play in Africa is Lebanese Hezbollah. For Iran, Lebanese Hezbollah is the role model for all Shiites worldwide. And Iran is propagating Shia to the world. Iran is propagating, exporting Shia to Africa, to the Gulf states, and even to South America. And we can see links between population in Western Africa and Shiite population in West Africa and other Shiite communities in Africa to Shiite communities in South America, and maybe through drug trafficking, narco-terrorism, and such. And this is how Iran is trying to locate Shiite communities, whether it is in Africa, in South America, even in Asia, trying to connect the dots of Shiite communities in the world. And Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, is the role model. This is the model that up till now, and given all the rounds of escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, Lebanon, Hezbollah still prevails. Hezbollah in Lebanon still prevails, and we can see Hezbollah Lebanon presence in Yemen, in Africa, in South America. And Hezbollah is very important in this regard. We'll see in a few minutes how Hezbollah is connected to Africa. As I said, the infrastructure of Iran is mainly based, but not only on Shiite communities. The targets of the Iranian operations in Africa are targeting Israeli, Western and American, and unfriendly states. When Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Chad, Iran tried to organize something to deal with this visit, and for instance Morocco, which has some ties with Israel, you can see Iranian trying to look for cells to tackle Israeli presence or Israeli penetrations or Israeli activity in African states. The bottom line is that all the sanctions, the poor situation of the Iranian citizens, the ongoing unrest and everything have not deterred Iran from continuing its activity in Africa and other places. This is what I said. Israeli Prime Minister in Egypt. And of course, the Iranian tools for conducting their operations in Africa are very similar to the tools that Iran uses in the Middle East, in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Syria and Iraq. And this is, of course, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, mainly the Unit 400 was, I don't know, I can't reaffirm that this is the name of the unit that is dealing specifically with in Africa, in Sudan, Chad, Ghana, and other places. But this unit was all over the Arab news a few months ago. They specifically named Unit 400 with those guys, Hamid Abdullahi, also involved in a plan to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in the United States, and trying to build or to set some African sleeper cells in a number of states. Another thing that Iranians are dealing with in African state is the diplomats under the disguise of diplomats, military attaches or economic attaches. They are putting guys from the Ministry of Intelligence or the Quds Force from the IRGC, putting them in the in states. We can see here the leader with Qasem Soleimani, who is the leader of the head of the Quds Force, which is responsible for exporting the revolution and the special operations outside Iran. We can see Soleimani in Iraq, in Kurdistan, in Syria, and other places. He's the guy. He's the left hand of the right hand of the leader. I will just now go through a few states in Africa that we have seen Iranian involvement. In Kenya in 2012, these two guys were arrested in Kenya with a lot of kilos of RDX, high explosives, trying to target Israeli or maybe Western interest in Kenya, and to say that it was to claim responsibility in the name of Shabab in order to hide this operation, not to complicate Iran or Iran accomplices in this area. The Iranian intelligence or the Iranian security forces, security apparatus tried to secure the release of these two. They sent some guys, but still, I think recently it was, they say that they're going to stay in jail. Abdel Fattahi and Mousavi still jailed for 15 years, despite Iranian efforts trying to bribe Kenyan authorities, judges, and other. They are still in jail. There was a lot of noise around surrounding this thing in Kenya. In Nigeria, I think following the events, correct me if I'm mistaken, in Zaria, this guy Zakazaki, who now I think is in India for his health. The Iranians the modus operandi of Iran is to try to gain Shiite communities in certain places. And we see it in the future, and this is how they locate the Shiites in specific area and trying to pave ways to their heart and trying to recruit them. They send them to Iran, they send them to Lebanon, they send them to Iraq, train them, educate them, a lot of propaganda, a lot of indoctrination, and then they are being sent back into the countries, and they are like sleeper cells or favorable community for Iran interest to gain control in the country. In Mauritania, it was a good example of how Mauritania managed to identify this Iranian modus of operandi, and in 2018 they banned Shiite activity in Mauritania. They closed the mosque, and you can see here of how Iran tried to use this mosque as a place to recruit Mauritanian Shiites and to educate them and to be their affiliates in the country. And now it is completely banned in Mauritania. And spreading Shiism is one of the most important, I'll show you later, one of the most important modus operandi of Iranian to set sleeper cells and to try to use as they did in the terror attacks against the Israeli interest in Argentina, using the local Shiite community in the triangle border, mobilizing them, and finally carrying out the attack. In Morocco, again, Iran, as it did in the past when we talked about Sudan, Morocco intelligence, with the help of other security services and intelligence services, found out that the IRGC, Hezbollah, are trying to get in touch with the Polisario, with the Polisario front, and then they again cut diplomatic ties with Iran, saying that we have irrefutable proof, names, and genuine events that Iranian diplomats in Algeria were handling the trainings and financing and equipping the Polisario front with advanced weapons, including surface-to-air missiles, to the Polisario front, and they cut relation. Of course, Iran and Hezbollah denounce all this, but this is one of the most important Iranian modus operandi in Africa and other places, which Africa is just a segment of the Iranian activity, but this is how Iran is doing its business, trying to recruit Shiite communities and make them operate in favor of Iran. Just reflecting on one of the Iranian modus operandi and how to propagate the Shia Islam. The organization is called, they have a lot of organizations that deals with these issues. They have the Islamic Propagation Organization, they have the Ahl al-Bayt. Ahl al-Bayt, it's the house of the Prophet, or the Shia version of Islam. So you can see that they have here in Hausa, Swahili, they have specific TV channels in these languages. They are appealing to the Islamic, mainly the Shiite audience in the places that they speak the languages. And you can see here they have a lot of media channels to reach the audiences. We can see here. I hope that it is translated right for the Swahili, or it's the Hausa, I think. We can see here Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force, and they put they put all the Iranian agenda in these African languages. They put the Iranian agenda, the Iranian messages against the West, against Israel. They put it in those channels, and you can see here. Maybe it will work. We'll see. Okay. You can see now we are in the midst of after, I think, the Ashura, when they mourn the death of Hussein in Karbala battle, which is the myth of the Shiite. This is the front page of Ahl al-Bayt, Abna, the main channel of propagating Iranian Shiite propaganda worldwide. And you can see here up front languages from all over the world: the Arabic, Hausa, Swahili, and you can enter. Let's see. And everything in this site is with a lot of Shia motives, in order to attract the attention of the Shia audiences, and with Iranian contexts, with Iranian propaganda, Iranian anti-Western propaganda, Iranian anti-Israeli propaganda, Iranian anti-Sunni propaganda, and this is what they project to their target audiences. We spoke about the religious aspect in all the terrorism attack. Most of the terrorists that we were mentioned here before, whether it's from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, are Sunnite. And Iran is trying to inject another element to this conflict, and this is the Shiite version of Islam. But what Iran is trying to do since the Islamic Revolution in the late 70s, they say that they want to correct an historical mischief in the history of Islam, like what happened in Lebanon. They want to every place they want to reconstruct or redo what happened in Lebanon. Until the Iranian Revolution, the Shiites in Lebanon were deprived. They were very poor. They didn't govern. The Sunnite harassed them all the time. But after the revolution, Iran, with its, they call it the Shia revival, Iran managed to take the Shiites in Lebanon and make them something else, like Hezbollah is today. As Iran is trying to copycat it, to duplicate this in other places, and among other the places are, of course, Africa, but up till now, as I hinted, as I hinted in my my opening slide, Iran influence in Africa is quite limited up until now, and in my opinion, it will stay limited in the future, because I think, as we saw in Mauritania, in Morocco, even in Egypt, some years ago, mainly a few Hezbollah cells were captured and detained. So Iran is trying, to sum it up, Iran wants to set up some sleeper cells to hit targets, Western targets, Israeli targets in Africa, with the help of the Shiite communities in Africa. Thank you.